Thank you, Lilia. And so I think that's, again, I want to point out to you that we need to really pay attention in our marriage, our spouse. Because otherwise, we can put a substitute, whether it's our job, whether it's our children. And if you've probably seen these pictures before where I've illustrated that, in an airplane, we've seen this a lot where the stewardess, the flight attendant would tell us, hey, in a event that the cabin loses pressure, this oxygen mask is going to fall down, and you got to put it on yourself first before you help, like number 4, before you help your elderly or your children, okay? And the obvious reason is that because if you try to help your children or the small one before you put your own oxygen mask, you might collapse, and then as a result, both will suffer. And that's the same thing. As when we don't put energy into our marriage, or you want to develop a good marriage, and then you're thinking that, well, I'm doing this for the business, so that I can provide food on the table, or I'm doing it for you, for the kids can have all the best things. But if your marriage fall apart, they're going to suffer. And you heard the testimony already. And there's going to be so much more suffering. And beyond that, maybe you might lose your job. I mean, if I break my marriage, I will lose my job probably. And the emotional costs, the stress, the health costs, the financial costs in a marriage breakdown, and all these costs, family, everything, it's very costly. And that's why we have to really, again, put our marriage without a competition, without something that replaces it. And so that's why, when men put their focus on their jobs and their careers, and then women, because they feel rejected by the husband, not rejected, but not loved, and then they could focus on their children. And then 20, 30, or 40 years later, when the kids are gone of college or get married, and then suddenly he's retiring, and then suddenly his mistress is gone. And that's when I've known people who've been married over 30 years and they get divorced. And you wonder why. You said, well, how come? After 30 years, I thought you will make it. But I've known people over 30 years decide to walk their separate ways. Why? I think this is one of the reasons. Because all his life, he's been focused on his job, his business. And maybe she's been focused with the children. And then suddenly when the children are gone, or the business is gone, or the business is bankrupt, or he's retiring, suddenly they look at each other and say, who are you? We've been living under the same roof. We sleep together, but we don't really know each other because they have not put energy putting their marriage first. Okay, so let's go on to the last one then. Vow number 3, and this is what I was talking about earlier. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who take his name in vain. And so number 1, God is saying that if you want our marriage to work, if you want your marriage to work, number 1 is you got to put your spouse number 1. Number 2, no competition or no substitute. And number 3 is that you need to speak well of each other. You need to speak well. Because the word says here, in vain. The Hebrew word actually means shav, and it means several things. Empty words, okay, or meaningless or useless, okay, insincere, not showing due respect, or in a severe case, evil way. God is saying that if we want our marriage to work, we got to use our words not in an insincere way, not meaningless way, not in evil way, to condemn one another, to cut down one another, but instead use it the opposite, to encourage one another. I've heard it said this way. When you begin to speak negatively about somebody, especially your spouse, that your spouse may not change as a person, but you will change, your attitude will change, you yourself will change towards that person because you begin to disrespect that person. You begin to devalue that person. So you yourself changes, even though that person may not change, because you keep on saying negatively or using our words in a negative way towards our spouse. And so the power of the tongue is very important. The world will try to sell us many things, like, okay, if you want to spice up your marriage, buy some flowers for your lover, okay? Roses, whatever it is. Or maybe, diamond is a woman's best friend. Right? It can cost a lot of money. Or maybe, you want to prepare a romantic meal for your husband, or you go out on a special holiday, getaway holiday, to a romantic scene. These things are good, okay? There's nothing wrong with them if you can afford it, okay? That's a great thing. But they are very expensive, right? They're very expensive. But I figure something out even, this is, There's a cheaper way, okay, and a more inexpensive and practical way than just buying this, and that is to use our words. When we encourage your spouse, when we encourage each other, it doesn't cost anything, but it can build your marriage. It can build your marriage. You don't have to buy diamond rings because you can't buy diamond rings every year even, or maybe some of you can, but I certainly cannot, and then, or going to romantic dinner every single night. It's not practical, but simple words, kind words can help develop the marriage. Now, unfortunately, men and women have different languages. Okay, there's talk here about I've recommended this book to many of you. The love languages, because we receive love differently, we communicate love differently. But beyond that, men and women speak differently as well. And so this is probably very difficult for me too, because now maybe I'm a bit generalizing here. Okay, so bear with me. Most men are very, they don't talk as much as women. Okay, they internalize things. I know with Mimi and I, she's very good in trying to draw things out of me. When I'm stressed or I have a problem in my life, in my ministry, I internalize things, and she will say, Ed, do you want to talk about it? What's wrong? She can, because after all these years of marriage, she will know when something's wrong. She can see from my attitude or from the way I say things, what's wrong? You want to talk about it? But I'd like to internalize things in my head, in my heart, whatever it is. But women usually like to talk, right? They like to talk through their problems. So when I sat down with Mimi sometime before we got married, she would, when I talk about the day, and I would say, how's your day? She would ask me. And I'll say, oh, fine, But when I ask her, how's your day? And man, I get a minute by minute, agenda here. It's really neat, But let me tell you why that is. I think, okay, and this is just my thought, and that I learned, and see what you think of this. The reason why that is because first of all, when God made man, it says here, then the Lord God took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. So in other words, when God made man, the first thing God did with that man is He puts in a garden. He gives him a job. Okay, Adam, go ahead and cultivate the ground. Okay, take care, name the animals, whatever it is. So as Adam was working, there was no Eve yet, he was working, and when he faces a problem or a challenge in his life, he tends to just probably talk to himself or talk to God. Okay, right? He talks to God and says, God, I don't know how to do this, or he talks to himself, he thinks about it. He internalizes, he doesn't talk to the animals, he internalizes it. But think about a woman. When God created Eve, what is the first thing God did to her? Look at verse 22. It goes like this. The Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which He had taken from the man, and He brought her to the man. Very different. God made man. The first thing man saw was the garden. Do it, work, cultivate it. So he works by himself. But when God made Eve, the first thing God did to Eve was brought her to the man. Means relationship. You see? So that's why when a man has a problem, he thinks to himself, he internalizes things. But when a woman has a problem, she wants to talk it out with her husband. And that's why when Mimi and I sit down, and this is probably very typical, okay? And I know I've done it many, many times. When we sit down together during dinner, before we have kids especially, and she has problems with work or whatever it was, she would tell me and in details all the problems. And for a man, all I do is that I try to capture just enough to figure it out in my head, right? I'm listening and she's talking, and in my head I start thinking, okay, I think I have enough information, and I believe this is a solution. And then I'm thinking I shut her out already. Okay, she's still talking, but in my head I'm already going, okay, this is the answer, A, B, and she's talking, and I'm saying, okay, this is the, then I'll cut her off and say, oh honey, I think this is the situation. I think this is what you need to do, A, B, C, right? The man gives the rational answer. And then she would keep on talking. And in my head, I was saying, I just told her the solution. Why is she still talking to me? It's just not finished. And then she would, I said, Mimi, didn't you hear what I said? And this is the solution. Yeah, but that's fine. Thank you, honey. And then, so she was wondering why, I'm so cold, I'm so, rational. While at the same time, I'm thinking, why can't this radio stop talking, and I keep on hearing. But so men and women, we need to understand this is the way God created us. And so we men need to learn, hey, wives, God made it in such a way that they need to communicate. They need to talk it out. And we need to be patient. We need to listen, because maybe they even know the solution, but they just need to talk it out, right? But for women, please understand too that